Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss a leaked email from the Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, from May, which revealed that he had argued against the herd immunity policy, as well as delaying lockdown, but was not just ignored, but actually told off for presenting his views. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, yeah, this email, the Chief Scientific Advisor, who is appointed by the Prime Minister, says that he was told off by officials for giving scientific advice. I mean, the temerity of it. Now, before I go over this, I do need to point out that this is an email from the Chief Scientific Advisor talking about herd immunity and lockdowns towards the end of May, when the original policies had been exposed as a huge error already. Now, the email isn't proof of the views that he held back in February and March, because the email was not from then, or the advice he gave, only what he was saying in May, but it would be a strange thing to be saying to people who would know the truth. Now, before going over the text, one thing that stands out to me is his claim in the email in arguing for lockdown, or more action on lockdown, or lockdown earlier. He was suggesting that he was told off by a number of officials, but amongst them, the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty. Now, it's obvious that the government did not follow the scientific advice at any point of this pandemic. They said they did, but in reality they didn't. They just wanted to blame scientists later on. Ministers said they were following the science, but we knew that they were not, because the science that they were claiming seemed to contradict the science explained by actual scientists, not only in this country, but all around the world. So the idea that the Chief Scientific Advisor would have given advice that was then ignored by ministers or even politically appointed officials would actually come as no surprise. That he would be rebuked for arguing for a lockdown earlier than we did by the Chief Medical Officer, who is a public health expert, no question about that. That would raise some questions. But this email is a bit of a reminder that Boris Johnson, were he not so thick and dependent upon Dominic Cummings, could actually have come out of this pandemic with his reputation much enhanced, as opposed to facing almost certain replacement next year. So quickly going over the email, it says, this is to do with a Sunday Times letter to Downing Street. I've not been able to find. It says, thanks. What should we do, if anything? In some ways, there is nothing new here. These are all arguments that have been put before. The one thing on herd immunity is I did make it clear at the select committee that ultimately herd immunity is what is achieved by vaccines, and that, you know, and that is what is stop epidemics. But I just don't think it's worth going back again on that. If you see the CCS paper produced in February, it's very clear that we warned, that what we warned of and what needed to be prepared for. In other words, you're saying here, look, we explained all this, we said that, you didn't do it, well, but we warned you. It is also the case that I argued stronger than anyone for action for lockdown, with a telling off from CMO, Chief Medical Officer, PSDHSC, I'd have to think about that, not sure that, and Cabinet Secretary. Is there anything we need to do, or just keep quiet? Again, alluding to the fact, and this we knew this anyway, because we knew that what Whitty and Vallance were going along with in terms of the way the government were dealing with this. We knew that this was not based on their advice, but they were going along with it. They were presenting themselves at these press conferences when there were some arguing, I was one of them, that they should have done the honourable thing and said, look, you know, no, we're not going along with this. This is wrong. This isn't the best way to deal with it. And they should have said that or resigned. But again, this is showing that, you know, although he may have given good advice, ultimately he was behaving like a good little boy and doing as he was told. Now, Boris Johnson wanted to show how exceptional Britain was, of course, the whole Brexit mentality, and to show the world how to deal with this pandemic. Unfortunately, rather than pay attention to his scientific and medical advisors, he paid attention to Dominic Cummings. But it actually could have been different. I mean, this is what this email reminds us of, because many experts around the world have pointed out that in the Chief Scientific Advisor Vallance and the Chief Medical Officer Whitty, the government had exactly the right people in the right place. Obviously, the Chief Medical Officer is going to be a medical expert, but there's lots of different specialisms. The chief scientific officer is going to be a scientific expert. Again, there's lots of different backgrounds they could come from. Both of these people came from exactly the right background to deal with a pandemic. Absolutely ideal for a pandemic. So if they were listened to, then far from having the worst response to the pandemic, we actually could have come out looking very well. I'm not going to say we could have had one of the very best, because we were always going to suffer from 10 years of abuse of the NHS. Bear in mind, compared with Germany, they built into their healthcare system extra capacity. There was always that extra capacity for an event like this. We didn't. In fact, we didn't even build in enough capacity to deal with just our normal seasonal issues. There were some problems that couldn't have been solved quickly. But those things aside, we had more time to prepare than most comparable nations. We're an island, so ports health, easier to achieve. And our top advisors had a background that would have made them absolutely shine during a pandemic such as this, if they were allowed to lead our response. Again, some people may have noticed in the news this week, Iceland, initially they were making a proper arse of it. They changed tack completely. They decided to remove politics from it. They were led by the science. They completely removed any political decision making. And do you know what? They're beating it. All Johnson had to do was follow that advice. It wouldn't have needed any effort on his part. That's the beauty of it as well. Because you can look at certain qualities. You think, well, Boris Johnson's just not the right sort of prime minister. His laziness and his lack of attention to detail would have been no barrier at all. All he had to do was to okay what Vallance and Whitty were saying instead of Dominic Cummings. Just apply the same sort of willingness to go along with an idea to the experts instead of a history graduate who may not even be all that brilliant at history for all we know. And he'd still be doing all these terrible things. He'd still be trashing our institutions under cover of COVID. He'd still be threatening to break international law regarding Brexit. But the COVID response would have been difficult to criticise. All Labour would have been able to do, they could have pointed to the 10 years of underfunding for the NHS, which will have stopped us having actually. So you would have always been able to point to Germany, who would have had a better response. And that would have been a valid argument as well, because that's still the Conservative government. But for Johnson himself personally, they wouldn't really have been able to do much, because he would have got the decisions right if he'd have just listened to the experts. And as I say, it would have taken no effort from him. Labour would have been forced to attack the government. It couldn't have just gone on about the NHS funding from the last 10 years. They can't keep doing that every week. They would have had to have shifted onto other ground. They'd have had to go on to Brexit, for example. Something the Conservatives would relish, because they'd need something to be poking at them. But as it is, Johnson did listen to Cummings. He didn't listen to Whitty or Vallance. Cummings, who cocks up everything he touches. And Labour can afford to stay away from Brexit debates for the time being, while they focus entirely on the worst COVID response of any advanced economy. And that is why Conservative MPs will actually be forced to dump Johnson, and the sooner the better, because it's not just that he isn't effective in defending the government's actions against an effective opposition. We've seen that. It's that he is actively giving ammunition to that opposition. In addition, although the government tried to argue that its opponents should not draw international comparisons during the first wave, it didn't stop them doing when it suited them. But the public did look at international comparisons, and they could plainly see that the response in other countries, though variable, has been better. And it was also interesting to note earlier this week, Matt Hancock telling Parliament yesterday that it will take weeks to get the testing problem sorted out that I was talking about earlier today. Weeks. We're in the second wave now. It's rampant. It's exponential now. And yet apparently, we are going to fix it. It's going to take a few weeks. And also, who actually believes that the government will actually finally deliver on their future promises? Because they're very good at that. Oh yeah, but it's going to be like, we're going to do this and it's going to do this. Who actually believes that they're going to deliver one of those future promises in the time frame suggested? Because now, as we enter that second wave, the countries that got things right the first time are better prepared for the second wave and future waves, because they learned lessons. The countries who made no attempt to learn lessons. Our government actively blocked an attempt at an inquiry. We argued for an inquiry so that we could learn lessons and get the second wave response better. No, that was blocked. We deliberately didn't want to know what went wrong, which means that we can't learn. So a country in that situation will make an even bigger mess of the second wave, because not only will you have all the same problems you had in the first wave because you've not improved anything, but your healthcare system's already exhausted and a bit demoralised, and then it'll also be coinciding with all the usual winter tomfoolery as well. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.